Welcome, everyone. It's so great to see all of you here and welcome online. My name is Leah Chan Greenwald, and I have the honor of serving as the Dean and Richard J. Morgan Professor of Law here at the William S. Boyd School of Law at UNLV. We are Nevada's law school. It is my privilege to welcome you to today's program where we have partnered with the Knight Foundation, together with the American Bar Association and the Nevada Democracy Task Force to host this election law forum. Today's program is part of a series that is aiming to equip people with essential, nonpartisan, fact-based knowledge on election law to better inform their communities in the lead up to the 2024 elections and beyond. This event will focus on Nevada's specific election law issues tailored for local journalists. This event will provide practical, nonpartisan, fact-based guidance on understanding state election laws, ensuring that journalists and those that write and follow the election are prepared to cover critical election issues accurately and effectively. We are very grateful to have assembled a terrific panel for this event. And I'm going to announce their names and I'm going to welcome them up on our quote unquote stage. We are grateful to welcome Chief Deputy Secretary of State Gabriel de Chiara, Attorney Bradley Schraeger, Attorney Brian Hardy, and we have our very own Professor Rachel Anderson, who's going to be moderating this wonderful panel. So please help me welcome them. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. As you heard from the Dean, I am Professor Rachel Anderson, and also a co-chair together with Bill Curran, who is here of the Nevada Democracy Task Force, which is an extension of the ABA Task Force for Democracy. Welcome to this Knight Election Law Forum. As some of you may know, last month, the American Bar Association House of Delegates passed Resolution 801, which adopts the Statement of Principles to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, the rule of law, and American democracy. During this past year, the ABA Task Force on American Democracy that was created by ABA President Mary Smith has been working to expose and combat perceived threats to cornerstones of our democratic form of government. And this resolution supports principles that go to the heart of that endeavor. This forum is also guided by the principles of that endeavor. As you know, this virtual series is designed to provide journalists and others with essential, nonpartisan, and fact-based insights into election law, and with a goal to providing the knowledge that's needed to inform our communities effectively as we approach the 2024 elections. You know we have an exceptional panel here today. We are pleased to have this conversation with you and a mix of both government officials and private election lawyers. These are some of the people who are actively working on these election issues right now in Nevada. Now, part of what that means is that they or their agencies or their law firms may be in litigation with each other at any given moment in time. And in fact, due to current litigation, it may be the case from time to time that one or more of the panelists declines to be the speaker on a particular topic. Please don't draw any conclusions from that. That is the structure of our panel. They're just not commenting. Today, we're going to walk through from beginning to end what happens when a voter registers through when an election is certified. Now, feel free to write questions along the way or at the end into the Zoom chat if you're participating virtually, or if you're here in the room, you can raise your hand and someone will bring you a piece of paper. If possible, I'll integrate them into our discussion along the way if they are relevant to some of the topics that we're talking about at the moment, and we'll also take some questions at the end. We are looking forward to this conversation. So we're going to get started, and we'll start off first with some introductory remarks by each of the panelists. They'll talk a little bit about how they come to the election system, some thoughts on it, and their role in this story. And we'll start off to my immediate right.
Thank you very much, Professor. My name is Bradley Schraeger. I'm an election lawyer here in Las Vegas with the law firm of Bravo Schraeger. I have been doing that now for about 17, 18 years. It is about 90% of my practice is election law. To underscore the importance or the growth of election law over that period, it used to be something I did for 2 months every 2 years, between Labor Day, Election Day. It's now something I run a full-time law firm on 365 days a year, election years or not election years. It is now a full-fledged discipline and law practice. I started, I will say that I represent almost entirely Democrats. I have been the general counsel for the Nevada State Democratic Party and I think pretty much all of the presidential candidates here in Nevada going back to 2008. And that was really when I started doing this. More of like a sort of full basis was in the summer of 2008 for the party, but also for the then Democratic nominee for president, Senator Barack Obama. Since that time, well, that period really inaugurated Nevada's ascendance to battleground state. And for the entire period that I've been an election lawyer here in Nevada, Nevada has occupied a central role in our country's electoral landscape. And I've been lucky enough, or if you want to call that luck, to have had a front row seat that entire period. As an election lawyer, my job is to represent my client's perspective and to initiate and to advise on legislation regarding the election process and the political process. I represent PACs, I represent candidates, I represent parties, I represent nonprofits. I am a partisan in my day job. However, as you will see, my Republican colleague, not surprisingly to my right, far right, actually. It is someone that I have to work with very well. I respect very much. One of the reasons we so well is that we understand that regardless of what people think about the differences between deep partisans in this country, two of us and the folks we represent having a working relationship when it comes to both litigation and legislation is an incredibly popular sinew of a continuing political system. So I think, though I will say things tonight that will sound partisan and may even redound to the, to a negative view of some of the people that my friend Brian represents, that's not something that makes its way into our relationship because it can't. One, we respect each other too much, and number two, that's not that doesn't serve the law or society or politics very well. So I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Hello, folks. My name is Gabriel Chiara. I have the honor of serving as the Chief Deputy Secretary of State for Secretary of State Francisco Aguilar. I'm very excited to be here. Like Secretary Aguilar, I am newer to the election space, but unlike the Secretary and unlike both of these gentlemen here, I am not an attorney. However, I do deal with elections and election statute and election law almost every day. To add on to what Mr. Schraeger said, I do think another thing that folks from across the political spectrum can agree on, including Mr. Schraeger and Mr. Hardy, is that sometimes they're not fans of our office. And I think it's great that we can bring them together like that. The Secretary of State's responsibility in elections, in addition to being the chief elections officer of the state, is really to be the umpire, to ensure that the law is followed as written, to call balls and strikes, to represent the interests of the voters, to ensure that elections are run lawfully, that everyone involved is obeying the statutes and regulations set forward in all of Title 27, all of election law. And it's something that the Secretary takes seriously. It's something our whole team takes seriously. But it's not just the Secretary and I in a back office rifling through papers. There is an incredibly large team of nonpartisan election officials across the state that work very hard to make elections happen. At our office, that starts with Deputy Secretary for Elections, Mark Voloshin. Deputy Voloshin was the deputy for elections under Barbara Sagafsky, the previous Secretary of State, who was a Republican. One of the first things that Mr. Hardy said to me when I walked in was, "Mark's great. We love working with Mark." Mark's excellent. He's also not an attorney, but he has been living and breathing Chapter 293 of the Nevada Revised Statute, 294A, 295. He can rattle them off in his head far better than I can. But he also works side by side with attorneys from the Office of the Attorney General, because we can't do this without the support of attorneys, because there is a lot of interpreting and synthesizing statute, because somehow every day, and I'll do my best, because again, I'm not an attorney and my best not to disparage the profession that I rely on every day, but somehow we get asked a question that it seems like no one has ever been asked before every single day, and we've got to sit down with our lawyers and figure out, okay, well, this is a new impossible situation. How do we take the law and the regulations that are as written, and how do we find out a way to provide an answer to our constituent or a clerk or a candidate, right? And then there's the whole team of the whole election division at the Secretary of State's office. There are the county clerk's offices, the 15 elected clerks across the state, and 2 appointed registrars at each of the counties and their whole teams. And then there's the hundreds and thousands of poll workers that work very hard to ensure that elections are administered fairly and securely and transparently. So while again, the secretary is the chief officer of elections, and I am essentially his chief of staff, we are kind of the tip of a much larger team that works very hard to ensure that elections happen the way that they should. We're very grateful for folks like Mr. Hardy and Mr. Schraeger, who again do their best on behalf of their clients as is their job, because it's all of our goals to ensure that that everything happens the way it should. And when someone brings something to our attention, even though sometimes that happens through a subpoena, it's because they're trying to make sure that the law is followed, that the law is carried out appropriately. And we're all that's all any of us want. So we're very excited to be here, very grateful for the opportunity, excited to talk through all of the many, many things that go into the conduct of an election. And thank you all for your time.
Hi, my name is Brian Hardy. I'm with the law firm of Marquis Arbach. I am a Boyd grad, so I always tell all my partners that are also, many of them are Boyd grads, that I'm one of the first fully accredited grads. So I make sure and let them know that I started in 2003 when we first got accreditation and graduated in 06. So I had full accreditation, where many of them were my predecessors only had partial accreditation. But again, I come to you as I'm the general counsel for the NBGOP. I am also election integrity counsel and have been for a number of years for the RNC, the Republican National Congressional Commission, and the Republican Senatorial Commission. So I have a number of clients that I serve on that side of it. And I have been doing so since about 2014. So I've been doing this for quite a while, which is why Bradley and I know each other so well, right? Many of you probably see tons and tons and tons of different lawsuits, or you think that there are lots of lawsuits that are being filed. You don't know how many of them that get resolved behind closed doors, because we're able to have discussions. And that's one of the benefits that I think Brad and I have been able to form, that relationship of respect, where we can actually give each other a call and kind of say, what are you seeing? What are we seeing? We're getting something done. That line of communication, I think, is always helpful to be able to have in resolving disputes before they happen. And then if we can't get an answer, then obviously we're not afraid to move forward in other directions. And so I will tell you that having served in this capacity, it doesn't mean that I'm on the far right, although I might be here today. Doesn't mean that that's where we sit. I represent clients from a number of different political parties, individual politicians and things like that. But I do have a client that I represent every 2 years at least, with respect to lobbying and taking care of their issues relative to the election law. So that's who I am. And if you guys ever have any questions or need anything, you're always reach out. And I are always open to have questions and talk to anything.
Thank you. So we've agreed to start off with the hot topic of what keeps you up at night. And we'll go here and then to Brian and then to Gabe. What keeps you up at night when you think about this?
About
election?
elections.
About
Yeah,
elections, about this election?
Especially from journalists, this is the number one question I get. What freaks you out as you get closer to election? And the real answer is, it's not the election itself, right? Because we have, against all odds, really good elections here in Nevada. The law is good. The structure is good. Everyone is working in really good faith. We may, colleagues and I may disagree with certain interpretations of statutes or how they're applied. That's fine. People may disagree that we have the amount of voter accessibility and access that we want. That's fine. We may disagree about the level of integrity or the doubts we have about the election process. That's fine too. That's not what keeps me up at night. what keeps me up is that not that our elections won't go smoothly, but that there are people out there who don't want them to go smoothly. As when you talk about, and you mentioned, the EPA statements of principles having to do with defending the rule of law. When you're defending the rule of law, necessarily by definition, that means you are defending it from something. It means that there are forces who would see things from the other side, or what you consider to be the other side. There are forces in our society that would seek to profit from the breakdown of electoral machinery. That's what keeps me up at night, because when people start saying no to judicial orders or writs of mandamus, or start thinking that the law itself regarding democracy is illegitimate, that's when you start to see the breakdown of our democratic system. Not if some election has a problem and has to have a recount, not if someone is found to have double voted. Those are problems and they happen in every election I've ever had anything to do with. Those things happen. There are no perfect elections. They're run by normal people, right? What scares me is the growing sense in this country that elections or democracy itself is somehow dispensable. That's my great fear.
I think particular to this election, I think the one thing that I have a concern about is going to be, we're currently implementing a new system in the state. It's called the VREM system. It's an election, it's a top-down election system. And we were hopeful that this system was going to be out in order for the primary to be this year. And it didn't get released in time for that. They had some errors and issues that we were facing as they couldn't get released in time for the primary, so we could do a test run on it. So for the first time, we are going to test a system during a general election of a presidential election. I think this is going to be an extreme test on that system, and I hope the system is up for the task. I'm cautiously optimistic. We've seen a number of videos and other things like that on it, but this election cycle, that's what you asked me, was this election cycle. Because I think generally I share some of the same concerns that, that there may be people out there trying to undermine the election system. But in this election system, that's my biggest concern is we have a new unknown that has never been tested, that we need to be able to make sure that it's going to operate. Because otherwise, if it doesn't, we are a battleground state. And as a battleground state, if our election does not go well, it will have a rippling effect on the country. So we really need to make sure that it operates at its peak performance. And in order to do that, it's going to take transparency and input from both the Secretary of State and both parties, making sure that we're all participating, doing everything we can to see success in this particular endeavor. And so that's what keeps me up at night is I want to make sure that this system this year is going to work. We're going to test it for the first time in an election that's going to be absolutely overwhelming, I think, in the numbers of people that are going to come out to vote.
So I'll address the things that keep Mr. Hardy up at night first. So we are implementing a new top-down system for elections. It is called VREMS, the voter registration and election management system. Thankfully, the system that we are implementing has been tested at length and has been used here in Nevada previously. Clark County uses that same system. It's a combination of e-pulse poll pads and total vote by a company called Knowing. And if you voted here in Clark County in the general election or the presidential preference primary, you checked in on those poll pads, your voter registration is currently managed on total vote. So that's all going great. And we are moving. We went live. I have no sense of linear time anymore. I believe it was just over 2 weeks ago. We finished converting all the data from all of the other 16 counties in the state and moving them onto the total vote system as well. We have already conducted 3 previous mock elections with each of the counties across the state, and we will be conducting another one later this month. Respectfully, the new top-down system actually makes me feel a lot better about this election because previously we had 17 different counties with 17 different systems. And the state, that the best we could do is say, good luck, guys. Hope everything goes all right. But now what we have is a uniform system across the state. We have a state that has a help desk, that has access to all of the same tools that the county has, that has access to all of the same data that all of the county has. So that if something goes wrong, the state can immediately not just be there in person, which we've offered all of the counties, if they want someone from the state there on election day or during early vote, they'll have someone there, which I'm not sure has happened previously. But they'll also have someone at our help desk who can say, okay, tell me what you're seeing. Let me log in. Let me see the exact same screen, right? That is a level of fidelity and hands-on ability to help counties that just haven't existed in the state before. And I'm not sure if, this statistic is kind of publicly known, but I think the most recent number is 10 of our 17 clerks and registrars are new. They are new since 2022. They had not previously conducted an election prior to this thing. And so the ability for the state to be able to help them with training their staff, training their poll workers, providing them training materials is something that really does help set my mind at ease. In terms of things that keep me up at night, I'll say that we really focus on being prepared, right? Being nervous about things isn't helpful. The question that we ask ourselves all the time is, what can we prepare for? What can we help the counties prepare for? We're seeing it right now in Washoe County. I was on the phone earlier with the deputy county manager in Washoe County, and obviously right now, they're all in a rapid response and emergency response room, right? They need to know what direction the wind is going to blow in because they need to know what direction the fire that's in Washoe County. If something like that were to happen during early vote or during the election, that is, it's incredibly serious now, and everyone that is affected, that's unthinkable. It's our job to think about, well, what if something like that were to happen during the election? We had a tabletop activity today that was planned with the Washoe County Department of Emergency Management. Obviously, we had to cut that short because they had other more important things to be working on. We work very closely with the clerks and we ask them the same question. What are you worried about? What can we help you prepare for? It's something that we take very seriously. So the things that keep me up at night are, have we made enough plans? Have we done the outreach we need to do? And I just take notes for the next day and I work with our team and then we make those plans and we ask ourselves, okay, well, what's the next plan? We can on and on from there.
For some of these questions, not all panelists will answer and sometimes all will, maybe often, maybe not. We'll take a step back. So how does Nevada fit into the federal election system? And I'm going to go to you, Brian, first. What is the interaction between federal, state, county, and local?
So, and to go back is the fact that this VRAM system is going to be a top-down system run by the state. We're all excited about that because then we take kind of some of that local, and we have so many counties here, and we take all of those, and we put them under one, which is nice. They'll all be at the state, they'll all be maintained. I want to see that happen. And so that's exciting. That's why we say cautiously optimistic, right? We all want it and we all hopeful that it works. And so we can hopefully take away some of those local and county jurisdictions and we only keep it as a state and federal issue. And if we can do that, keeping those jurisdictions out of it, because they'll all be the same across the from the state, then we'll be able to see the interplays between state, which is the state officers, and the federal, what they have to do underneath requirements of the federal law in order to make sure and maintain voting lists and the rest of that things, which all can be done now at a single source instead of in 17 different sources, right? And so there's some great things that'll happen. The interplay on a federal basis is going to be there's 6 electoral votes, right? And so those are obviously going to be on a federal basis. We'll kind of see where that goes. But that's how we state and federal that you're looking for how the interplay is, and they're really hopefully going to take some of the local dynamics out of it.
And sort of playing off of that, when Gabriel mentioned that we used to have 17 different county elections that essentially melded into one statewide election, it's essentially the national model as well. States elections are essentially state-run under state law. And so we have 55, count the District of Columbia and Rico and Guam and American Samoa and the Virgin Islands. And I even think there's a part of our election system that is for overseas voters that can vote just for the presidency, right? So there's all of those being run under their own legal rubrics, while at the same time it's happening under a federal umbrella of equal protection and one person, one vote, and all those things. So the supremacy clause interacts with state law in ways to ensure the constitutionality of state elections. But for the most part, elections in every state are creatures of state law. That's why this sort of highly specialized, I couldn't go and be an election law in Montana or Florida. I wouldn't have the first idea of what was going on. I'd have a sense, right? Kind of like Portuguese speakers kind of know what Spanish people are talking about a little bit, but not really, right? That'd be the way it would be for me to go to those states. Is that the particular election law cultures of each different place are highly specific.
To Mr. Schraeger's point, that occasionally, and I will say it does seem to be happening more and more rarely, but occasionally Congress does get together and they pass a bill, right? And occasionally, once in a while, that bill has something to do with elections. And so recently, they passed the Electoral Count Reform Act, which changed federal law as it relates to something that has, I know, to do with, I think it's recounts, right?
Well, it sort of gets you to both the deadlines for and the ways in which the Electoral College representatives for each state can be transmitted. We have a little unpleasantness.
Right. So they passed that at a federal level, and some of the deadlines that we had in state law didn't necessarily line up with new federal law. And because Deputy Voloshin is kind of eagle-eyed for any potential changes at the federal level, he made sure that we changed state law to align with federal law. So now we're in a better place. We are always on the lookout to make sure that we are paying attention to not just changes in the law, but federal guidance, that we are running federal guidance by the Attorney General's office. Wait a second, does this make sense for us? Does anything conflict with what we're doing at the state level? So there is that separation. And we are trying to do the best we can to keep elections in Nevada moving forward, regardless of what happens.
And they've done a great job with HAVA in particular. They've done the requirements of HAVA required cleaning of voter lists. And we saw, I think just recently it was released out that there were 140,000 voters that came off of the voter list in Nevada as a result of state and the counties working together to follow the requirements of federal law. By way of example, I think that was an example.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's get into some of those nuts and bolts and that arc of what happens to voters or the voter registration through certification. And here I'll start with Gabriel, Brian, and Bradley. So how do voters register in Nevada? Who's allowed to register? Where can people register? How old do you have to be to register? How does the government make sure that only those who are eligible to vote in Nevada are register in Nevada? What paperwork and documentation is required? You can register to vote anytime. What safeguards are in place to ensure that voter registration works?
Softball. Thank you. So first and foremost, I want to be super duper clear about this. Only United States citizens can register to vote in Nevada. Super basic, very clear, very important. Only US citizens can register to vote here in Nevada. That is state law. So federal law, I believe, in every state. Some states allow for non-citizens to potentially vote for certain non-federal offices. That is not one of those states. Only US citizens can register to vote in the state of Nevada. How can you vote? Or how can you register to vote? There are a lot of different ways. You can go to your local clerk or registrar's office. They've got all the forms right there. You can be a member of a given political party within a certain age and not be registered, and someone is going to show up to your door 8 to 12 times over the next however many weeks, and they will make sure that they pester you until you do. You can go online to registertovote.nv.gov. Registering to vote online is incredibly easy to do. You can also register to vote same day in person. Nevada has same day voter registration, which makes registering to vote incredibly convenient. Another way that a lot of people get registered to vote is through automatic voter registration, which was passed through the legislature in 2019. through the DMV. If folks have indicated that they are United States citizen, they can be automatically registered to vote through the DMV system. There are different ways that you can be registered, different types of documentation you can provide. Usually you have to provide one proof of identity and a proof of residence. If you provide a driver's license, for example, that works as both. If you've got your Nevada driver's license, that is both your proof of identity and your proof of residence. If you have provided documentation that does not include a Nevada DMV provided photo ID, the county's going to do some follow-up. They've got to make sure you are who they say. If you have not provided that information in person, they still run you through a check. You provided your information online, for example, and so you have not showed up in person so that a poll worker or a clerk can validate, yeah, that's you, great. That information gets run through the DMV database. You've got to make super sure that all your information, yep, this person is who they say they are. Those checks and balances are very important. The other thing that is required to register to vote is you sign an attestation, right? You sign an oath that says, I swear that I am a United States citizen who is, I forget what the wording is, I apologize, not an attorney, et cetera. But you sign that attestation that says that I am allowed to vote. I am a United States citizen. I meet all of the qualifications and I should be registered to vote. In terms of, sorry, what was the last couple things on the thing?
What safeguards are in place to ensure that
Safeguards.
registration works as intended?
So voter registration happens at the county level. The county clerks by state law, they are charged with registering you to vote. Even if you register to vote through the state, that information goes to the county clerks and they're the ones who double check it. They run, they send that information to the DMV, for example. The counties are responsible for validating your identity. If, for example, let's say you were registered to vote, but some of that information still hasn't been provided, and somebody still hasn't seen you, what the counties can do is your profile in that voter database, you can be set to ID required, which means when you go to check in to vote, the poll worker, big thing pops up. It says ID required. You need to validate this person's identity before you can permit them to vote with one of the acceptable forms of ID per statute and regulation. If a person sends in their mail ballot instead and their identity has not yet been verified, that mail ballot is put aside and that voter is notified, hey, you have not yet validated your identity. You really have to validate your identity. If you do not, your mail ballot will not be counted. This is something the clerks and the Secretary of State's office take incredibly seriously. We get, when we do get, and I'm sure we'll come to this later, the Secretary of State's office is responsible for investigating crimes related to elections. I will say that ineligible voters, that is not the crime that comes across our desk most often. But when we get them, it is our responsibility to investigate, and that's something that we take very seriously. I think I covered everything there. Apologies if I missed anything, and I'll Brian and where you think my answers need to be shored up.
First on this one, Brad.
I'll go. It used to be so unnecessarily tedious and difficult to register to vote. Of the things that I am most proud of over the last 5 or 8 years of election reform in Nevada, automatic voter registration and same-day registration have been an absolute watershed in this state. It used to be that if you weren't registered by a certain sort of arbitrary deadline prior to an election, you were out of luck. Now, when you go to the DMV, you're automatically registered unless you opt out. Whenever you do that, you have contact with the DMV, you are automatically registered. which is, look, you're free to opt out if you want to. But if not, you will be registered. You'll be registered nonpartisan if you don't indicate a preference. But that's fine. At least you will have an opportunity come election time, to go and vote without having to do anything else. Right? Without having to make it an affirmative thing you have to go do. I once had a politician say to me, Bradley, you don't need to make it this easy because voting is a privilege, not a right. I responded that that would come as a tremendous surprise for those people who fought and died for the Voting Privileges Act. No, the Voting Rights Act. It is a right. And same-day registration has removed an entire raft of unnecessary difficulty. We used to have tens of thousands of people who had to vote provisionally because there was something about their address or they hadn't updated their forms, or there was some snag process that was difficult to begin with for them to register to vote. So their ballots had to be set aside and resolved after the election. Now, you can update your registration or you can register for the first time the day you are standing in front of the poll worker. Right? So the question that boiled up in that was, why are we making it necessarily difficult? We don't need to do this. There's nothing to be gained by unnecessarily deflating the electorate with chores as opposed to opportunities. So of the things that you mentioned, I'm most proud of in this state is that we decided to make it as easy as possible for people to exercise the franchise. And that's one of the reasons why when I said I wasn't all that concerned about the structure of elections is because we have done things in this state to make the basic mechanics of access to the poll easier for everyone.
And I agree with Bradley in the fact that we have some excellent ways for people to be able to be registered to vote. We need to be registered to vote. And I am so, I'm proud of the fact that we've taken away any and all barriers necessary in order to do that. However, we do have, and this is something that you all heard Gabe talk about, safeguards, statutory safeguards to ensure that only those people who are permitted registered to vote are registered. That means non-citizens shouldn't be able to vote. There needs to be make sure their safeguards are in place, and there are safeguards in place. The question is always the question that always happens at the end is, are the safeguards being implemented sufficiently? The questions that always raised the same way is are we making sure that those people who are not supposed to be registering and they're doing it, understand that I agree with you even 100%. This is criminal activity, right? I mean, they're doing something, they're signing under oath and under penalty usually. Hey, I am a US citizen, and they're trying to interfere out of this election process. And in doing so, they're diluting the vote of real people that are really voting. We can know what actual registered voters, people that are entitled to have their voices heard, are saying. And so we need to make sure that those safeguards that are in place are being utilized and that we make sure that we only have voting those people that are allowed to vote. So that's one of the things that we have is I'm proud, as much proud as I am about the rights and abilities we have to have access, is the fact that we have safeguards in place. And we hope that the safeguards are always being.
So let's follow on and talk about how those records of the voters are kept. Who's responsible for maintaining the lists, keeping them up to date? What happens, for example, to the voter registration of someone if they move to a different state? And again, what safeguards do we have in place to keep the voter rolls secure?
Yeah, I can take this one. So this is one reason we are so excited about the new top-down voter registration system. So the Help America Vote Act of 2002 said, look, we've got to get with the times. Every state must have a computerized voter registration database. And initially, what a lot of states did was what Nevada did. They said, okay, well, every county, you better come up with your own big Excel sheet and you email those to the state in a very secure manner. And then the state is going to do a lot of copying and pasting. And we're going to put all those many Excel sheets into one big Excel sheet. And that will be our computerized statewide voter registration database. And then gradually, obviously, states automated that process, they streamlined that process. But what states found as technology developed and as a lot of technology was incorporated in more natural ways, what they discovered was, wait a second. Why do we have, look, Nevada has 17 counties, Iowa has 99, right? Why do we need 99 different databases? Why do we have one database that every county enters into? because that way we're not dealing with formatting issues, we're not dealing with weird variables that counties have, we're not dealing with weird business rules and well, this county uses dots between the numbers of a phone number, and this county uses dashes, and that has broken everything. And so bit by bit, more and more states went from that bottom-up model where every county was responsible for their own thing to the top-down model. There was a single statewide database that counties entered data into. Nevada, until a week and a half ago, was one of those last few remaining bottom-up states. And now we are a top-down state, right? Which is something we are incredibly excited about because it was not a lot of fun, even though we had worked very hard. The county IT departments worked very hard, the Secretary of State's IT department to stitch together those 17 different files coming from potentially 17 different types of software, 17 different databases. It caused a lot of problems. And so now that we are going to have a single statewide database, the counties are going to enter data into. It's going to make record keeping easier. It's going to make it easier to track when voters move from county to county. There's not going to be as much lag where, okay, well, this person moved from Washoe to Carson City. Well, okay, their voter registration moved. Got to double check. Wait, is this person actually this person? There's a lot of steps that are going to be taken out of the process that is going to make keeping Nevada's voter rolls overall clean much, much easier, which we're very excited about. When voters move out of state, that is a little bit more complicated. I'm not going to talk about ERIC for a long time. I don't think that would be helpful to anyone. But for a while now, there has been, and this is one of the acronyms that Mark always knows, and I don't have off the top of my head, an electronic resource information center, electronic election reference information center. Someone will have it. But ERIC is a nonprofit organization that provides a secure way for states to submit their voter rolls all to this single central database, which will then match them against each other and say, okay, well, it seems like this voter that's still registered in Nevada, that might be this voter that just moved to Colorado. Can you guys get together? Can you check and see if this is the same voter? Because if they just moved to Colorado, you should probably cancel their registration in Nevada. For a long time, that helped. ERIC has has come under a lot of partisan fire. I will say, Secretary Zagafsky was very supportive of ERIC. ERIC has, from its foundation and bipartisan, is an incredibly helpful list maintenance tool. Some states recently left ERIC for what seemed to me to be partisan reasons. And we are working on doing what we can to build as many relationships with as many states as possible, so that we can do whatever we can to communicate directly with other state election offices to attempt to keep Nevada voter rolls as clean as possible in as easy a manner as possible. However, that kind of elides the other issue, which I really want to emphasize. That is personal responsibility, right? Because when you move to a new state, you didn't come under some kind of temporary amnesia that made you forget that you were a registered voter in the state of Nevada. It is not that difficult to cancel your voter registration, right? Each of us is responsible for our own, the same way you would update your forwarding address for the United States Postal Service, you can also just cancel your voter registration. And the more individuals that take that step of personal responsibility to say, wait a second, yeah, I just moved to Nevada. I was registered to vote in Louisiana. I should cancel that registration so that their rolls aren't off, so that I'm not still getting ballots, so that I'm not, improperly bloating the rolls in another state. That's also incredibly important. I find that in a lot of conversations about cleaning up the rolls or what's going on here, there's obviously a lot of conversations about the state and the clerks, and we obviously do have a role in cleaning up the rolls. It's something we take very seriously, but there's also an element here of personal responsibility individuals, and that's just something that I want to highlight.
Thank you. I'm going to pull in, before we turn to mail-in ballots, I'm going to pull in a couple of questions that I think are from the in-person audience that follow on voter registration. One goes to the DMV and what steps the DMV takes, if any, to verify a potential voter citizenship and that person registers to vote. And then secondly, why is voter registration information public? What information is public and are there any privacy concerns?
So first, as it relates to DMV, when you are at the DMV and you're getting a state ID, if you show a piece of documentation that indicates that you are not yet a United States citizen, get a different form, not have the voter registration stuff on it. There is a corollary that I want to state here. There are a lot of conversations about a lot of lists. Why don't you look at all these lists of people with green, right? A lot of people with green cards become citizens. And just because they may have gotten a Nevada identification when they had a green card, perhaps they later got a driver's license after they became a citizen, but they're still on some list somewhere. So we have to be very, very careful that the DMV does have very strict procedures that they follow. In addition to that, hey, if you show a card that indicates, you show identification that indicates that you're not a citizen, you get a different form. There is a different affirmative box that you have to check. When you are filling out, it's the same thing. Hey, are you a veteran? Are you interested in being an organ donor? It's another box you have to check that says, actually, there's two of them because I didn't answer that one question. To be registered to vote, you have to be 18 years old by the time of the general election. If you are 17 years old, but will be 18 by the date of the general election, you can pre-register to vote. So some of those questions are also on that DMV form, but there's another affirmative box you've got to check that says, yes, I am a United States citizen. There's another box that says, no, I'm not a United States citizen. You check that other box that says, no, I'm not a United States citizen, I'll register you to vote. DMV takes their role in this very seriously as well. And the second part of the question was?
That was, why is voter registration information public? What information is public and are there any voter privacy concerns?
I believe that the elements of voter registration being public, I believe that relates to federal law. I believe that's HAVA. I mean, one way or another. It's either in state or federal law. I apologize for not knowing offhand. Do you know?
Transparent. Yeah.
That's HAVA. Okay. So it's federal law. The elements that I believe are public, I'm going to try and remember this offhand. Your voter registration number, first, last, middle, address. If you registered to vote and provided your phone number, I believe you can opt out of making your phone number public. Yep, you can opt out of making your phone number public. So unless you opted out, the phone number you registered to vote with, I think your birth date may be publicly available as well, and then your vote history. So any of the elections that you voted in, as well as your vote.
Let me be clear on vote history, not how you voted or who you
Yes.
voted for, just whether you voted.
Just whether you voted.
Well, your registration history as well, so it would show whether or not you participated in a Republican primary.
Right. And party,
Yeah,
right?
it's
Party
not-
is also.
yeah, It's not gonna be who you voted for, is what
Right.
I'm saying, is that, it'll just say whether you voted, did you vote in the primary, did you vote in the general, maybe you voted by mail, those kind of things.
And the other thing, and I want to try and save our staff as much heartache and sorrow as I can. Your information, and this is the unfortunate age that we live in, your information is public, not just from the Secretary of State's office. Unfortunately, your information is public from more sources than our office is responsible for. And when folks like political action committees or parties get that information and they really, really, really want to get you to vote, call you and they text you and they email you, that can be very frustrating. Fortunately, in most cases, our office cannot do anything about that. You ask someone to stop contacting you and they do not stop contacting you, reach out to our office. We will provide you the contact information for the Attorney General's office, who handles telemarketing and that sort of thing when folks don't follow the law in terms of ceasing contact. Ask them to.
I just want to say one thing about non-citizen voting. This is something that has come up a couple times already here. It appears to exercise the national imagination to a degree that is perhaps historically unprecedented at this particular moment. And I just want to add a sort of human element to it, which is I find people in general to be incredibly unwilling to commit felonies. Right? But on top of that, the possibility of committing a felony that would expose yourself and your family to deportation. And I think that increases the likelihood that someone is going to engage in this just to cast one vote of 2 million in a state like Nevada. No hope of influencing the actual outcome of anything but the most star-crossed possible election that comes down to that vote. So I understand the importance of safeguards. And I understand that this has entered the national lexicon and controversy in a way that is particularly charged at the moment. I'm not going to say it's a unicorn. It's a pretty rare horse. The human reasons that I just mentioned, as is voting generally. Any worth it? Unless you can change the outcome of an election, right? Voting as a non-citizen, voting impersonating someone else, they're the single dumbest way to commit voting fraud. Now, some people may in fact be that stupid or that, whatever the opposite of risk willing. It is not a scourge in our society that I can detect. Others may disagree with me. That's my position.
And because, did you want to?
Well, I mean, we can, rather than go into all of the issues that I think we can discuss on that particular matter, the concern is that there are people out there that are doing it. First one I think is not the unicorn, but the rare horse or whatever it may be. It happens, and when that type of thing happens, it dilutes the vote. Your vote is worth less. And so that's why it's a concern, and that's why the secretary, and that's why I think bipartisanly, we agree that that shouldn't be happening, right? And we want to make sure that there are sufficient safeguards in place and that those safeguards are being implemented. It's just a making sure that that doesn't happen, and that when it's identified to occur, it actually gets prosecuted. Because if it's not being prosecuted, no matter how big a felony you say it is, it's not being prosecuted, and nobody's afraid of it and nobody moves forward.
That's not something that I disagree with. However, I would sort of match that and say, when people bring up that how important voter ID is, have to have voter ID. We have to root out whatever problem voter ID is going to address. We all know there are some people in our society who don't have IDs, right? And when I come into rooms like this, I have to explain to them, when we talk about voter ID, whether you're for it or against it, requires you to have an act of empathy, because I'm pretty sure everybody in this room has in their pocket right now a sufficient ID that could allow them to vote. But you have to imagine that there are people who do not have that, for whatever their circumstance, because of where they live, how they talk, or whatever their situation is, they don't have that. That person may be shut out of access to voting. Now, if one person who shouldn't be able to vote gets to vote, I think it's just as important for us to focus on those people who should be allowed to vote, who may not be. So I would pair the focus you're talking about with, okay, what are we doing to make sure if we're going to require ID, that everybody has that? We can charge, we've got a poll tax, imposition on their finance, or those kinds of things. I just want these concerns to be in the end commensurate with one another, opposed to weighted in one fashion.
We've had this discussion before in the fact that 100% for the fact that we need to make sure everybody has access to an identification for free. It shouldn't be charged for that. There shouldn't be anything there. And so making sure that if there is an ID requirement, which there isn't right now at this point in time in Nevada, there's a ballot question currently under the law. That they have access to those things, they have charge, and that they have the availability to make sure they can cast a vote.
I'm going to ask about mail-in ballots, and I'm going to take a question from the group and then tie in the continuing discussion into other pieces, I think, as needed. So how does mail-in voting work? Who gets a mail-in ballot? What are the ways to cast a mail-in ballot? What can voters do to help ensure that their mail-in ballot is counted in the first round? Is there any way the board to confirm that the mail-in ballot was counted? A question from the group. What's your sense of mail-in ballots, and is there any substance to rumors or claims that there are additional mail-in ballots being dropped off to sway elections? What kind of safeguards in place, to try to prevent that from happening? Is there anything that journalists may want to be aware of in mind when you're covering mail-in ballots today?
I'll say very briefly, and then I'll give to Gabe, but to Gabe to sort of talk about the sort of mechanics of the whole thing. Along with the other things I mentioned, universal mail-in balloting. I mean, universal mail ballots are among my favorite things. Right? Instead of having to make a plan, you have to call voters up and say, what's your plan? How are you gonna go cast your ballot? How are you gonna get one into your house? You're gonna sit at your kitchen table with your family. All you gotta do is put it back in the mail or in a drop box. And so for access, it's fantastic. It's been a tremendous thing. I also know it's incredibly controversial for some people. But the former registrar used to say to me, and I've said this before, and I'm gonna let my colleague, Secretary of State's office, tell you exactly why this is true when we talk about safeguard. He used to tell me, the registrar from Clark County used to say, I could go up in a helicopter with 100,000 blank mail ballots. Drop them over the city like you used to see in those old war movies, right? He said it wouldn't change the results of the election. One vote. Not a single vote would change. That's how solid our voting system is when it comes to the mail votes. We'd have a lot of litter. And a lot of paper didn't go anywhere. It wouldn't change the result of the election at all. Universal mail balloting is secure, it's accessible, and that whatever the drawbacks of them are, it doesn't match how good it is for people to have that opportunity to vote from home.
In Nevada, for many, many years, even before universal mail-in ballots, we had mail-in ballot opportunities that you would vote. Only recently has that changed. And so since the law has changed, you have mail-in ballots now. And so there's a number of different ways in which those mail-in ballots can be cast. And that's what I think has been posed to Gabe is how can they make sure to cast those ballots? What can they do and not do? We can talk about the Voter Assistance Act on that particular issue as well.
So put your ballot in the mail. That's the first one. So yes, every active voter, and there's a deadline, it's on our website. If you are presently an active voter, you will be sent a mail ballot sometime pretty soon. If you are an inactive voter, you can update your registration, and that will make you an active voter. And then you will be sent a mail ballot as long as you do that before the cutoff, which off the top of my head, I can't remember. I feel like October 14th sounds familiar, but I can't tell you what it is. Right, I remembered correctly, October 14th. So the first thing is getting the mail. Right? The second thing is, yes, you fill it out. Very needed as well, sometime soon, hopefully. There was just some changes to what everybody's sample ballot is going to look like. So before too long, you'll be receiving your sample ballot. So you've got that. You'll have your mail ballot. Fill it in very cleanly with no hesitation marks or anything like that. You'll place it inside the return envelope that has been provided to you. And then you've got those options. You can either drop it in the mail. You can deliver it to a ballot drop box. The location of all of the ballot drop boxes in your county will be included on your sample ballot. Or if you want to make super duper duper extra sure that your ballot gets to the right place, you can bring it to your clerk or registrar's office directly. Have a place for them. You can just bring it right there. The second thing that's very important to make sure that your ballot gets counted, and I think this is one of the first and most important safeguards that Bradley was talking about, is the signature matching. That's the next and most important step. You've got to sign your mail ballot, and then it goes through a signature matching process. I don't know about some of you folks. There may be kind of a generation gap in terms of when folks started practicing their signature and having a regular signature. And so we are seeing a spike in folks' signatures not exactly matching. Maybe the signature you used when you registered to vote is no longer the exact same signature that you put on your ballot. If your signatures don't match, that ballot gets pulled aside for a second look. So that someone physically can look at not just the first signature that they validate against, but every signature that's in your voter registration file. Maybe you've only got one. Maybe you just registered to vote and you just signed your mail-in ballot, so they only have those two signatures. And it's not super clear, hey, I'm not really sure that this signature matches this signature. What happens then is a signature cure is required. They send you a notice, they make it available on their website, which means that, again, the parties, the PACs, right, all of the interested groups will call you and text you, email you incessantly, letting you know, hey, you need to cure your ballot. What that means is you really need to get a hold of the county, and they need to make super duper sure this signature on this mail ballot is in fact yours before that ballot can be counted. And if you do not cure that signature, that mail ballot will not be counted. Ballots are all set aside. If those ballots are not cured by the signature cure deadline, which I believe is 6 days after the election. Yeah, Saturday. Right. If those signatures are not cured by the end of the cure deadline, those ballots do not get counted. Nowadays, it's something. What I will say. The Secretary of State, as I said, we take security and transparency very seriously. So we have done something that I don't believe any other Secretary of State previously in Nevada has done. We have begun releasing quarterly numbers around what kind of investigations we do, specifically around elections. How many potential double votes went on in each given election. We send them out to our full press list. And the very first one we released after the presidential preference primary, the Secretary and the Attorney General gave a press conference talking about their commitment to identifying and combating any potential election fraud, which, to Mr. Hardy's point, is incredibly important. To Mr. Schraeger's point, it is also incredibly rare. The number of potential double votes that we investigated in both the presidential preference primary and the primary election, investigated, not turned over to the Attorney General's office for potential prosecution. So the total number of investigations amounted to 0.0001% of all ballots cast. Even if every single one of those investigations was found to have been an actual crime and those crimes were prosecuted, those ballots were taken aside, and two, none of those ballots would have changed the results in any one of their given elections. And three, again, we identified that there was a potential double vote. We investigated as necessary. And whenever our investigators, which starts with a civil investigator, and then if we believe it is possible that a crime has been committed, we do have criminal investigators in the Secretary of State's office that we turn the investigation over to. We go to people's doors, they make phone calls, they talk to the clerks, they talk to the individuals, and they conduct a full criminal investigation. Only if they believe that a potential crime has been committed does something get turned over to the Attorney General's office for potential prosecution. So while it is something that it clearly needs to be taken seriously, because any potential fraudulent vote does present a threat, to our electoral process, they happen so rarely and are taken so seriously that they almost never. And when I say almost never, again, we are talking about 1/10,000th of 1% of votes cast. We get to the source of the crime. I hope that makes you all feel more at ease about voting by mail.
So let me give you one comment on the signature verification process. Many of you here in Clark County in particular received recently a card asking you to update your signature. And I hope every one of you did it, right? Because that helps to give the most current signature that you have As well as there has been significant litigation that happened over signature verification. Originally, when signatures were being brought into this whole process, they were scanned in by the DMV at a certain DPI, which was less than what was required for the signature verification process. There were some issues that were put on that. What's happened in Clark County, they've continued to try to update their systems to be able to get the highest DPI, and that's dots per inch, so you can make sure that you understand, so you can get the highest quality signature. And so they do that through gathering it through the past, right? Trying to get those ones, as well as sending out these cards that they recently sent out. And that way they can get an accurate signature matching thing. And I commend Clark County for doing that, for sending these things out and trying to get their system to the point where it can accurately verify signatures to make sure that we don't have any issues with people voting other people's ballots. So I just want to make sure if you got one and you're here in Clark County, please send it in. That's a good thing, right? We're trying to make sure that the system is being able to be as accurate as possible.
Thank you so much, Brian. And we are, those cards are presently going out across the rest of the state. Yes, it is super important. If you don't want to put that card back in the mail, you can always take it to your clerk or registrar's office. If you're not comfortable sending something like that, you can always say hi to your local election officials. They love meeting new people who are actually excited to see them. Don't want to yell at them about anything. That's super important.
It sort of seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the young and the old who have the sort of largest sort of discrepancies with their signatures. Older folks, because they may have registered to vote 20, 30 years ago, and under their circumstances or their physical nature changed. And young folks, you all, because I don't sign anything, right? I mean, I grew up signing stuff all the time. So my signature is the same. Sign stuff with your finger at the grocery store or at that or with the cursor, right? So you just don't have the repetition. So your signatures sometimes are not done 3,000 times over. But I think that's the cohorts, right?
Well, it just happens. I mean, like I say, I can tell you that I probably haven't seen a change in my signature for the 15 years we've been doing this, and I haven't
I've
seen
seen
a
it
change
a lot.
And so either way, our signatures seem to be pretty consistent because we sign a lot of things every day. And so you new lawyers, you're going to be signing all kinds of stuff, guys. You're going to get your signature locked in at some point in time. But for right now, I agree that we need to make sure and keep those things updated, which is why this card is so important. I did want to add one other thing to what you said was one of the other ways that you can have ballots to be submitted in this state is through voter assistance, meaning you can go collect your neighbors, your friends, your aunts, your uncles, your cousins, whomever it is, you can go collect and you can walk in now. The laws that were passed, good, bad, or otherwise, you can walk in with an entire stack of ballots and hand them over to the registrar, and they will accept an entire stack of ballots from one person is giving them an entire stack of ballots. That can happen now underneath the system. So one person can bring in, not somebody via the mail, somebody otherwise, but we're talking any person, walk in as a citizen and bring in an entire stack of ballots. So if you guys are looking to vote as a class, you guys can do that and send one person down to go and cast your votes. That can happen now in the current regulations without any security presence or otherwise.
Well, so you say that with a tinge of horror. I think it's awesome.
Well, I'm saying it is what it is, and so we can all do it now.
Yes.
Let's all make sure that we get out and vote.
And then those ballots go through that same signature verification process that has all of those security steps every step.
Thank you. So let's turn to in-person voting.
A lot less of it.
There's a lot less of it, but the system has changed in the past few years. But how are those ballots that are cast in person? How are those transported to where they're counted? Are people allowed to observe? What is a poll observer? Who's allowed to be a poll observer? What are they allowed and not allowed to do at the polls? Is it still possible to challenge an individual voter at a polling place in Nevada? And what else should journalists know or keep in mind if they're covering in-person voting?
I will do my best, but I will probably ask you, so I'll start with the last question first. Journalists are allowed inside polling locations. Journalists are allowed inside polling locations. They can record audio or video. They cannot record the voting process itself. They cannot gather anything that would include PII. They cannot ask any kind of partisan or political questions within that 100-foot barrier outside of the polling place. We are working with county clerks, especially Clark and Waukegan, which is where most journalists will be, although I can tell you, County would be thrilled if you want to head out to Pioche. We are working with Clark County and Washoe County on kind of some uniform guidelines that we hope will be provided to all the polling locations and kind of make everyone's experience kind of more uniform across the state and a little more streamlined. We don't have those yet. I say because attorneys, but you know, everybody does have a lot of attorneys. But we hope to get those out as soon as we can. Voting in person. Yeah, still does happen, as Mr. Schraeger said, it does happen a little more rarely. It sounds like a lot of this relates to tabulation and observation. Poll observers can observe the conduct of a polling place. What they cannot do is, again, see anything that is related to PII. They cannot watch a voter cast their vote. They can't see, okay, well, that's one for this candidate, so, right? And they also cannot interfere with the polling process. If they note something that they have concerns about, they cannot say, wait a second, you've got to stop that right there. I think you're violating 293(5), whatever, right? That's not what can happen. In terms of the usefulness of observers, I'll leave that to these gentlemen in just a second. I will say there are still ways to challenge voters, including challenging voters in the polling place. Those statutes are relatively, I would say, esoteric. Rigorous is also a word that can be used to describe that process. And I'll probably let these gentlemen explain that further as well, because the observer process and the challenge process, those are carried out at the county level. Sometimes counties do ask us questions about the secretary's interpretation of statute, but in terms of carrying out the process, that's a county level decision. How do ballots get tabulated? So, super duper important. You go to check in to vote, right? You've got the little iPad in front of you. You say you're so-and-so. They ask for confirmation that you're so-and-so. You sign the thing. It's super important. You sign the thing. They make sure your signature matches. They do not feel that your signature matches. They can ask you for a proof of identity, right? That is an important step in the voter verification process. Once they have confirmed that you are who you say you are, they will hand you the little card. They will direct you to a voting machine. You will go and you will vote. After you are done voting, you will turn the card in, you will get the sticker, everybody's favorite part. And that happens all throughout the day. Everyone loves the sticker. When you have checked in at the poll bag, right? That information is communicated electronically over the internet to the voter registration system immediately. What that does is, you cannot, great, I have voted to Desert Breeze. Time to get up and go to Pearson Community Center and check in and vote again. That cannot happen because you have already checked in. The system has been notified that you have checked in. And if you attempt to check in at any other polling place in the county where you are registered, it will throw up a flag. The poll worker will say, oops, sorry, it's showing you already registered, you already voted. And if you really make a stink about it and you say, I really want to vote, given a provisional ballot, time they get around to investigating that provisional ballot, the other thing will be called, and our officers and the showing up thing won't be great. So probably don't do that. Second thing, the tabulation part. When you have voted on the machine, those machines not connected to the internet whatsoever. Never connected to the internet. Does not happen. Those machines do have those votes. They've got the VVPAT, right? So when you vote on them, they've got that little receipt paper thing so you can check, make sure, yep, all those votes are what I cast on the machine, or you hit ballot cast. The machine has all of the votes on it from that day. Those votes are on flash drives. No one is ever alone with those machines. No one is ever alone with those flash drives. There are very clear statutes and regulations about chain of custody. All of those flash drives are sealed in clear containers that have tags on them. Chain of custody is maintained through signature. Those flash drives are taken by bipartisan teams back to the county election office, where they are kept locked and secured away until it is time for them to be tabulated. We understand that the people's confidence in elections is affected around this part, tabulation, and the security of tabulation. And that's why every single county takes it so seriously. Can you observe tabulation? Yes, absolutely. Every county does have a station set up so that observers can watch the tabulation process happen. You're watching mail ballots get tabulated. Depending on what county you're in, it's going to be very boring, but it'll look different depending on the county. If you're watching tabulating from the voting machines happen, that will also be very boring. You will be watching a person stick flash drives into a computer. However, that computer also not connected to the internet, right? The process of tabulation is incredibly secure by design. And that is something, again, that the clerks take seriously. In rural Nevada, most of these clerks literally keep all of their tabulation equipment, their poll pads, et cetera, in literal vaults from the 20s and 30s. This is something that everyone understands they need voters' confidence with, and it's something they take very seriously. So, unless there's follow-ups on tabulation.
I just want to say that two things have been great. One of the great things about this VREP system, and why we're kind of looking forward to it, is that the Secretary of State, as you just heard, is starting to push down what are going to be consistent memorandum, as well as they're working on right now. We talked about all of the procedures and everything that's going to be happening, so that we see that being done the same way in every county. We look forward to that particular thing happening. Excited about that. So we can get consistency, because with consistency, then I don't have to go to 17 different counties and train 17 different groups of poll watchers on what they need to be observing, right? And on that particular county, this is going to make things much better here in Nevada. So that's my first thing, that I commend that on that side of it. The second, with respect to the observation, is that one of the standards in Nevada is called meaningful observation. We just have to be able to meaningfully observe the process. Again, that doesn't mean, and I talk to people all of the time about the fact that they need to make sure that they're just there to observe the process. And I tell everybody that they need to make sure that there's not an anomaly, right? What are they looking for? What am I looking for? What's going to happen? Is there an anomaly in the process? Because if it's the same thing over and over again, we know that things are happening the way they're supposed to. If something changes in that process, that's probably the anomaly we want to address and say, why did it change in that instance, right? So by getting these mechanisms, procedures in place, it allows for the observers to more meaningfully observe, consistent with what their right is in the statute. And then my final on that, I said the word rigorous, and I may take some heat from some of my own clients on this issue, but I am appreciative that Nevada has a rigorous challenge process, because what that person is doing is they're challenging somebody's right, potentially disenfranchising somebody. And so that process needs to be rigorous, if you're going to say that that person shouldn't have a right to cast their vote. And so it's necessarily a rigorous process. And if you do it improperly, there are penalties that are associated with that. And so I want to make sure that we're clear that supportive of it being a rigorous process. That wasn't a slight by any means, because we want to make sure that every voter has a right to vote, and only those voters who somebody has personal knowledge of that they shouldn't be doing that and to be able to be challenged. That it should be a very rigorous process, and they do a good job doing it. Did I miss anything, Brad?
No, I was just going to go back to in-person voting and point out that one other important innovation in this state has been, you used to have to go and vote in a particular place in your neighborhood,
Yep.
your precinct, a firehouse or elementary school, whatever it was. But during early vote, you could vote anywhere. You voted grocery stores and anywhere in your town. So we had the technology for you to be able to vote anywhere. Well, why are we sticking with this precinct system? We applied that now to election day as well, where you can vote anywhere in your county, and technology is sufficient to register. You are still part of a precinct, but you are simply recorded as having voted from that precinct wherever you voted. But much like universal mail-in balloting, from a voting consumer standpoint, the ease of access has improved for in-person voting as well.
And on tabulation, because we did talk about tabulation as well, I will say this, and hopefully the Secretary of State hears me say this, in the fact that I commend them during the primary, that they allowed tabulation to begin early results could be released, so we could actually have results and get to sleep on election night. Because Brad and I are never gonna sleep on election night, but, because we're both manning war rooms. But at that point in time, my wife, my kids, the rest of them, everybody can get to sleep that night because they have all of the results in a more timely fashion. And so I hope the secretary does it for the general, but that's up to you guys. But I commend them for being able to get tabulation done. So that's been a critique, I think, nationally on Nevada, and the secretary has done a good job trying to get that advanced to the primary and hoping to see that again in the general.
Thank you. So as our final, our final topic for our panel, let's pull in recounts, other types of challenges and certifications. There we are. When are votes recounted? So what triggers a recount? How do the recounts work? Are the rules for recounts the same throughout Nevada? How long do they take? What are their effects? And then on certification, what does it mean to certify the results? Who's responsible for the certification? What's the process? Would non-certification in a county affect certification of the whole state? We have a question from registration. Can a county choose not certify election results? And if so, what are the consequences? And what might journalists, if anything in particular, want to keep in mind if they're covering recounts or certification in Nevada?
Yeah, I can start on this anyway. Yeah, that's all right. A lot of times when you're watching national news, you'll see the recount is triggered by a certain closeness of a race in other places. That doesn't happen in Nevada. We have a fully someone has to demand a recount and go pay for the cost of the recount. So whether you lost by 10% or by 8 votes, you have to go and request the recount on demand. Now a recount is different from a contest. So I want to make sure we have those two concepts clear. A recount is an administrative proceeding in which the votes that were counted on the election the first time are counted again in the exact same way. Now, since we have very good tabulation in the first instance here in Nevada, there is very rarely much of any change in the results during a recount. It's really there just to catch whether there was a math error or something, obvious and egregious in the counting system. It does not deal with issues of problems at the polls. It does not deal with issues that could be raised in a court of law. That's what an election contest is. That usually is after a recount, an election contest, which is a court case saying, I, candidate A, lost to candidate B. There were illegal votes that were counted, or there were votes that weren't counted that should have been. Take evidence, there'll be depositions, all those things, and I test the results of the election. Those are two different things, like recount and a count. Now, the certification is a procedure by which the county registrar go to the county commission and say, here are the results that I provide you of what happened in the election. And the county then accepts those results and certifies them. It is a ministerial task. It means that the counties don't have a choice. That doesn't mean they can't mess up the schedule by saying we refuse to certify. That would in fact be problematic because elections are on timelines, right? Whether you want to do, whether you're sending electoral votes to Washington, you are trying to finalize recounts, election contests, and here in Nevada, legislators are elected immediately. They don't take office in January; they take office immediately. So the longer the certification process to officialize the election takes, the longer you would go without representation. And this goes back to something I started with, which is if a county refused to certify, most likely someone would sue, and the local district court or the Nevada Supreme Court would say, we order you to certify the election. This is your duty, you must do that. That's the point where rubber begins to show up on the road, like I talked about earlier. And what if someone says, you know what, you come down here and make me? I don't know what happens at that point. What I know is you've had someone at that point disobeying a direct order of a judicial authority on a point of law regarding our law of democracy. When we go back to what keeps me up at night is that I don't know what happens the next day after. Could a county do it? Yes. Should they? Absolutely not. Could it happen? It could. And the repercussions of that, because elections are on tight timelines, I don't know.
Given the all of the correct answers with respect to the process. And the process is what the process is. And have there been, counties who have said that they weren't going to certify for a period of time? Yeah, we recently saw that. Obviously, many of you have seen happen up in Washoe, and there were challenges on that issue, and the Supreme Court not intervening, right? But one of the things that I think is important that we look at is, and we can talk about kind of in general cases, happened in the Southern Utah case, and that's where a challenge versus a recount, right? Is that they asked for a recount down in Southern Utah, and then they went into the challenge process, and they had to gather evidence, and they brought in all the evidence of because these votes went through to Las Vegas and had to go back to Utah, and that was some issue or whatever it was. They had all of these kind of issues. That's where you get into the evidence side of it. It's not the simple looking at counting, everything add up correctly. It was 1 + 1 = 2 and not 4, right? And so we made sure that happened. So there is an evidence process that will happen in that. What's interesting, and this is where I think that people don't understand, what Brad and I actually have to do during election time, right? When you think of a case as lawyers, now, I'm not talking about the ones that play lawyers on TV, these cases that take, months to do. When Brad and I have to do a case, we have to gather evidence and put on a case in weeks. You have times where
Sometimes days.
days. I mean, we've had cases where we have to do discovery through the night into being able to respond to the discovery request that was, you normally get 30 days or whatever the rules were applied. You don't get that. And so you're trying cases in days to the point where you try a case and that the Supreme Court can make a decision on it in less than 3 weeks from the time the election happened. I mean, that's happened in this state. And so when you're trying and dealing with election laws in the state and you're dealing with election law, you really want to get into what Brad and I do. You gotta be ready to do it quickly.
Lots of coffee.
Yeah, and so election laws are interesting in that dynamic it is fast. It is going to make sure it happens because there are strict timelines that have to be followed both federally.
And to add to what Brian said, the Washoe County initially failed to certify the results of a recount. The Secretary of State's office brought it to the state Supreme Court. Washoe County decided to revisit that particular decision and did certify the results of that recount. And the state Supreme Court declined to intervene. What they did say in that declination was that if this were to happen again, that they felt that they could intervene in a timely way. And so to bring it back to where I started, right, when I said that it's not helpful to be nervous, what it is helpful to do is prepare. We're prepared for something like that to happen. Obviously, we hope it doesn't, but between us and the Attorney General's office, we're doing everything we can to account for what are the different potential situations. I will say in my role, I am all across the state all the time, not just meeting with the clerks, but meeting with county commissioners. And any number of these county commissioners, they may not agree with the secretary politically, but I can say, sitting down with a commissioner in Elko County at Star and talking about, certification. These are not really partisan issues. Folks who it is not necessarily a Democrat Republican issue of certifying an election. Everyone knows an election needs to be certified, right? On this election, in this general election in Nevada, there will be Republicans and Democrats that win up and down. It's going to happen. And everyone knows that for those results to be carried out, the election has to get certified. And so there may be things that pop up, but those issues will be resolved because there's folks like Mr. Hardy and Mr. Schraeger working resolved. There's folks at the Secretary of State's office in each of the counties, the Attorney General's office, the Governor's office, that work hard to make sure that they get resolved in a timely manner, continuity of government, continuity of democracy, that everything works the way it's supposed to, and then start it all over again.
And we won't
Optimism cheers me.
and we won't have any of those issues with ballots going across state lines anymore. And so that was a good thing. I'm glad that we were able to get that taken care of, because that was a concern that they had in Utah. And now we were going to have that same issue here when we were going to have ballots going over to California and coming back. And so, and the governor and Senator Masto and being able to get that so that we can keep the jobs here in Nevada as well as keep the ballots. when you're across state lines.
Oh, yeah, don't worry.
That's
The
good
secretary,
work.
the secretary made a bunch of phone calls too, don't worry. Yeah, no, we can all hold hands and agree that the United States Postal Service is something we can address in unison.
We are at our time, but I'd like to give everyone 30 seconds to make a final remark if you have one or have something to highlight that would be particularly useful for journalists we're covering that. And then we will wrap up.
I would just urge everyone to register and vote and participate en masse, absolutely.
One thing that I would urge, especially out of state journalists, there are a lot of narratives right now around elections again. I think that there is a real spirit of reality that applies in Nevada that not, I don't know, don't make other states' problems our problems. I think Nevada's gonna be it.
My response to that, everything is get out and vote and volunteer. Please be a poll watcher, be a poll worker. You guys are law students. You need to get involved in the process. Your lawyers or whatever you are, do it. I mean, get out and get involved in it. That's my recommendation because you can become a part of the process that is and what we really are made of. This is who we are. This is who we are as a country.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us and good night.